Well, we can't do a celebration of Women's History Month without talking to the women who you hear all the time on WFAN. And Moose and I are so excited to have this conversation with Ann Liguori, Danielle McCartan, Erica Herskowitz, and Lori Rubinson. And, you know, they need no introduction, but we'll give you an introduction. I mean, Ann, you've done it all. I mean, you started off the first weekend ever at WFAN with Hey Liguori, What's the Story? Talking golf with Ann Liguori, of course, Sunday mornings, 7 to 8. You got Travelers Insurance as your sponsor. Starts up again April 4th. We're so excited about that. And Ann, we know beyond WFAN, you've done so much in terms of your production company, Ann Liguori Productions. You're a brand ambassador for Ncaa Golf, tennis apparel, the chillax and CBD I didn't know about, and I got a lot of questions about that. We'll do that offline. And of course, the Hamptons Rope Collection, your jewelry line with Dunn Jewelry. Again, you've done it all, entrepreneur, host, everything. I mean, Lori, the Wharton educated, marketing executive, also hosting, late night shows on WFAN. You do it all. You've done it all. And it's just, your career has just been a marvel. Danielle, our newcomer, basically weekend host at WFAN, the future of, this station and what we see down the future for sports broadcasting for women. And of course, Erica, what is it? Is it 24 years? 24 years. Anchoring updates, but you've done it all too. You did play-by-play, you've done hosting, you've done everything, and you're synonymous with WFAN. You're part of the fabric of WFAN, as you all are. So I think I got everything there. With that out of the way, let's start with this one. I thought this might be a good place to go first. And Ann, I'll start with you. What drew you to sports broadcasting, and what drew you to radio specifically?
Well, I was always a big athlete growing up. I played in the backyard. I was the first one picked on all the teams. And I was normally the only girl at the time being picked for all this. I had an older brother, Jim. And so I was always a big athlete, a big sports person. I earned 16 varsity letters in high school. This was after Title IX was passed, because before then, when I was in middle school, there were no sports for girls. So that was very disheartening. But finally, when I became a freshman in high school, this, Title IX had been passed. We had sports opportunities then, and my whole world changed. And, but I always liked the variety of sports, Maggie. I just, I never pursued one. And I think that variety really helped me in sports broadcasting, because I had that insight. It would have been great to focus on golf, because I commentate golf now, but I didn't play golf until I was in my 20s. I did everything else. I played number one on the boys tennis team. We didn't have a girls team back then. So, kind of competing with and against guys, I think taught me a lot and prepared me for a career in sports broadcasting.
It's amazing. Lori, Erica, what about you?
Erica, how about you? Because
Erica,
when I first started working at the Fan, like Erica coming in from Rutgers was doing stuff behind the scenes, Mike and Chris and this and that. When I was an intern, summer of '98, what draw you to this industry, Erica?
Well, I think it's weird. My parents they were cleaning out their basement, and they found like some stuff I did when I was in elementary school. And it was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote, I want to be on the radio. So to a certain extent, when I was in second grade, I must have always loved the radio. I remember in high school coming home and turning on the Rocky Allen showgram. I think it was on PLJ as a teenager. And I would just like sit and listen to the talk, the banter, not the music so much, but the talking. And so I think I've always been drawn to talk radio. And then when I got to Rutgers on a dare from my roommate, I went to the radio meeting just for fun to see what it was about. And just, the line for news was the line for sports was short, and there was pretty much nobody on it. So I got on that line, and the rest is history. So I think I've always loved radio. I love talk radio. I never really listened. I like music, but when I'm even in my car now, I'm drawn to just hearing people talking about whatever. And so the idea of getting into sports radio seemed like a no-brainer, considering I was a big sports fan as a teenager. So.
All right, Lori, what about you?
I just want to toss back to something that Ann said for a second, which is you mentioned Title IX, and one of my favorite things maybe that I ever got to do, and this is actually on the marketing side of my career. I was a sponsor at the time, a young sponsor of the US Open, and my boss knew I was a massive tennis fan and sent me to a cocktail party for sponsors at Billie Jean King's apartment. And it's a complete, geek about this, geeking out that I show up, it was called for 6:30. I show up at 6:29 and a half. There's nobody else there. Billie opens the door. And so, Anne, to your point, I always felt that she was the person. You mentioned the importance of Title IX and what you got to do. And I think for all of us, we're part of that chain and that path. And one of the highlights for me is I got to say to Billie Jean King, thank you. Like what you did, for people like all of us, we get to do what we do because of what you did. And it was really special and important. And so that, and she handed me a glass of white wine. And it was just amazing. Anyway, but in terms of getting into it, I always tell people don't follow my career path because, I got into marketing. I mean, I went to Wharton. I've worked in, business and done that. And so it's been a weird hybrid career. But I always loved sports. My dad, I was sort of his, creation, older brother, similar story, I guess, in that way. But I loved if any two teams were competing or any two people in anything, even as a little kid, Manchester United versus Liverpool, like it didn't matter, whatever it was, I was passionate about it. And so it was less about radio and more about sports. I've just always been, and I think for all of us, maybe, Moose, you too, you can join the girls on this, but for all of us, I think at the heart of this is, radio, but for me also, like, you have to love sports. If you're going to be there, especially for all of us who've done that late night or overnight or any of that and talk to the listeners and the callers for hours, like, you got to love sports. I don't think you can fake that.
And I think also the opportunity was there. We didn't know. I wanted to get into sports broadcasting so badly, and I moved to New York City right out of college on a fellowship program offered by the International Radio and TV Society. And I started freelancing right out of the gate. So I was writing sports for USA Today while I was freelancing at ABC Sports Radio Network, covering every team in New York. And then this WFAN started. And it was going to start. And they called me in for an interview. And at the time, I was still at ABC Radio Sports Network. And I can remember reading that I got the gig, the Hey Liguori What's the Story show, which we later named it. I read about it in Bob Raceman's column. They hadn't even called me and told me officially. That's how crazy it was before the station even started. So
the station is exactly the same. Like that now
hasn't changed a bit.
Nope. Bob Raisman writes about it, and you find out you have a job.
There you go.
Now I have Marc into it too, right? He's got a little competition, Bob. Okay, so Danielle, what about for you? So you're younger than the rest of us, but also you're a teacher, you're a coach, a high school coach. It's the volleyball team, I think.
Yeah, and the softball team.
And the softball team. So what was your sort of introduction to radio, and why did you want sports talk radio?
Yeah, I'm a latecomer to this whole thing. I'm late to the party, obviously. As you guys are talking, I was thinking back to Roundtable College. I'm going to shout out Roundtable College. And I finished all my requirements, right? And I was just taking things that were like that I was interested in. And one of the classes available in that semester was sports media. And I was like, I'll try this, right? So I did a presentation on CBS Sports. I'll never forget it. And then it was a 3-hour course. And the professor was like, see me after class. And I was like, oh my God. Like I sat there for 3 hours. Like, did I do the wrong thing? Like I didn't know what it could have been about. And then fast forward a little bit, he said, my son works for Real Sports. Come to my office hours next week. I can put you in contact if this is something you want. Now I had my student teaching lined up and I'm a plan follower. And I was like, I don't know about this. And so I went to his office the next week and I knocked and there was no answer. And, I went to the class. I never said anything like, hey, you weren't there. Like, remember? And then I just had this in the back of my mind. Like, I gotta pursue this. Like, if this does, you know what I mean? Like, I never want to look back and say like, what if I didn't pursue it? And so, I met Tony Reali at an Italian conference and he was like, you got a Twitter? I was like, yeah. He's like, you got a blog? I was like, no. He goes, all right, that's your next step. You write yourself a couple articles in a blog, link it to your Twitter, and then there you go. And that's how it started. And so to get into radio specifically, I wasn't aiming for anything. I still am YouTube videos and video, audio, writing, and just whatever stuck. And this is what stuck. And I'm very fortunate for it to have.
You know, when you think about where you guys all are now, right? And Lori, will start with you. Like, if you had, life lesson thing that you've learned that you could tell a young Lori Rubinson, like, what would you tell a young Lori?
Well, listening to Danielle and probably and I don't know, I'm inspired by people like Anne, and your career path and that. And I think maybe for all of us, and Maggie, interested in you and your story too, is that I think that perseverance, I think that, like Danielle's saying there, is that if you want something, it's not 100% you can make it happen. I know there are obstacles. I know there is luck involved, but I do believe that on some level you make your own luck. And that if you keep trying and you want something bad enough, and be bold and be a little audacious, and don't worry, be the person who, I don't know, send the president of CBS Sports a note inviting him out to lunch when you're like 23 years old. Be that person, because you might not get the lunch appointment, but you might get the opportunity to go sit in his office and have a chat. Like stuff like that does happen if you're, just be confident in belief. Belief works when you play sports. I think belief works when you want to talk about it and do it too. Is like, even if you don't feel it, like just show up, persevere and have belief. I guess that would be the advice.
Erica?
Oh God. What is the question? What would I tell myself now? Well, you don't really know that.
Yeah, well, where you are now, what would you tell Erica Herskowitz, right?
I think there's a few things. For starters, when you're young and you're first starting out, you don't see the many different avenues that you could possibly take. So you have tunnel vision and you have a goal, and if you're hungry enough, like everybody on the Zoom certainly is or was at a certain point, you have to kind of be open to going in other directions. And I would also say, so when I first started, and Anne knows what I'm talking about, there was no Twitter. In fact, there were no websites really. I mean, I started right before the .com boom of the 90s. And so when you start off, you're not as inundated with things that don't matter, like what you look like and what people, did you get, like I've had 2 kids. So I've always been like self-conscious about gaining weight and losing weight and gaining weight and losing weight. And so as a kid, I really took those kind of things very hard. And I was always worried about what other people thought of me. And I think now, as I'm, many decades into this, I've stopped caring about that kind of a thing. And I think that it's a huge weight off my shoulders, not caring what other people think of me, and really just trying to do the best job that I possibly can do, and making sure that I'm a good coworker and a good, friend and a good teammate when it comes to, the people at the fan. And also making sure I'm a great mom and a wife and all the other things in my life. So it's striking that balance. It's not caring about what other people think. And it's being malleable, being able to move in different directions as life sort of shifts and takes you different ways.
So wait, I'll just lob on that, Erica. So a 2021 interpretation of that is mute people on social media. If they are dragging you down,
I muted 4 people this week. And you know what? I feel so much better. I don't care.
Very freeing.
It is liberating. Block, mute. I love both. Both are great.
And what about you?
So funny you talk about, social media and all that. I mean, we didn't even have computers when we started.
We had monitors, terminals.
Exactly. So the way I researched, for my sports interview, cable series that went on forever, and all the times I did the show on WFAN, I would keep file folders on every personality that I thought I would one day interview. And I would cut out articles in the newspaper, and I would have a file for every major sports personality. And that was my research. So, and those files, my God, I had so many file cabinets, right? Because, right, now you can just type somebody's name in Google and you get too much information on that person. But back then, that's how we did our research. But I would say, writing skills are very important. You have to be a good writer, whether you're on air or behind the scenes. I just think, if you're writing your script or sportscast, whatever, you just have to really work on your writing skills. I think networking is obviously very important. I got my first radio job by talking to Donna DeVerona. Billie Jean King became a very good friend of mine. But, I knew Donna because she was working in Manhattan and working at ABC at the time. And I went to Women's Sports Foundation conferences and met all these incredible women. And Donna said, you know what? You should call ABC because they're hiring for the Olympics in 1984. And I know Shelby Whitfield, she said, and why don't I make a call for you and see if I can get you an interview? And that was just so amazing because when you're thinking about it, this was in the mid 80s and there weren't that many women in sports broadcasting back then. And for somebody to, really go out of her way to introduce me to somebody, in the business was really unusual and just so great. So Donna helped me get my first freelance gig at ABC Radio Sports Network. I was a producer, and then it turned into an on-air job because I was at the LA Olympics in 1984 as a producer, and they needed somebody to cover tennis. And all these guys were in the newsroom like, I don't know anything about tennis. I don't know. And they're like, send Ann, she played college tennis. And I love tennis. And I had already been working at the US Open for HBO and, for ABC as a producer. So they sent me to the tennis venue. And I started doing on-air reports right then and there for ABC Sports Radio Network during the Olympics. And, the rest is history. I loved it so much. I kept doing the on-air stuff. So I think it really helps to help other people as well. I try to give back. I have 2 scholarships that the Liguori Foundation raises money to mentor women in sports media, one for Women in Communications, the New York chapter, and another for women in sports media. Awesome. And I just really feel good about helping other women because I remember the women that helped me when I was first starting out, when there were so few of us.
I want to jump on that. And I don't think I've ever told you how much I appreciate how good you were to me. Like young 19-year-old kid starting out, and you could have easily just turned your nose at me, and we would work together on Friday overnights. And I don't think I've ever expressed how appreciative I am to how kind you were to me. I remember you took me once to a dinner in the city, and you didn't have to do that. It was like, take your daughter to some dinner or something during Christmas. And I'll never forget how kind you were to me. And I think your example has helped me sort of treat other women in the same way. I would go out of my way for anyone that ever asked for help. And it's that sort of kindness that you showed me that I pay forward to. So thank you for that.
Thanks for telling me that, Erica. That means the world to me.
I love
great.
You.
I know, and I love you all too, but it feels so good when you see women that you've mentored or that you've helped go on and do amazing things. I have a woman named Kelly Burke who interned. She spent the summer with me at my house in the Hamptons years ago, and she was just so young and so naive.
Done that. Wait a minute.
and now she's doing all these play-by-play games. She just did her first college basketball play-by-play gig for CBS Sports, and I'm just so proud of her and all these women who have gone on to great things. They have a lot of opportunities now that we didn't per se when I was first starting out, but that doesn't matter. I'm just so happy, for all of your success and just to see the success stories of all these women.
I think if we're talking about the chain, I will say, I'll throw a little shout out and say, Erica Herskowitz, you were very kind and welcoming to me back in Queens in the, let's just be honest, Miss, like the disgusting falling apart
basement.
That, and it was basically all the guys, and I was showing up and figuring out what the heck I was doing, learning to be a solo host, and Erica, you were very, very good to me. So thank you.
And now I rely on you too. So
now we mentor each other, Erica and I.
We are.
So Laura Oakman has been someone that's been really, she has this galvanized thing where she takes women in from all over the country and it's intense coaching and things like that. And out of that, and it's non-competitive, which is the best part about it, honestly. And it's a network, right? We're growing the network. And through that, I had met Jen Connolly from the New York Giants and, in the PR. And I got a game day position, game day, in the press box, whatever. It was the coolest thing, right? This was like the last year that fans were allowed, so 2019. And I remember it was Sunday morning. You had to get there at like 7:30 in the morning. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. And I remember I looked at my phone and it said, Maggie Gray followed you back. And I was like, what? So I was like, well, that's pretty cool. Because I had just kind of started like my weekly show, and I was like, huh. I kind of put it down. I was like, didn't tell anybody anything. And I was like, kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I got a DM and it was like, hi, like, welcome to the station. If you want to go out for coffee one of these days, let me know. Maggie, I think it was like 2 days later. I was like, yeah, I'll be there. How's Tuesday? And so we met for coffee. And I just want to tell you, you're taking an hour out of your life, to just meet with me and I said, I think at one point I was like, why? Like, why did you do that? And you were like, well, there's only a few of us and I just really wanted to get to know you. So I, really appreciated that.
Well, I mean, it really is honestly because of, thank you that it was because Ann, Lori, Erica, because you guys were so gracious also to me. I mean, and I was just having we were just having this conversation. Moose and I did an interview with Taylor Rooks from Bleacher Report, and who's super talented. We're big fans of hers. And we were talking about how it's so nice now where even like when I was starting out, and this is now like 15 years ago, where there was like only one woman and you felt at all these places, like there could only be one of us. And it kind of set up like this competition. There could only be one. So it's got to be me versus you. And I always hated that because I never felt like I wanted to compete. I felt like I had more obviously in common with these women than anything else. And it just seems like that's really changed. And I've loved that about where the industry is going, where I feel like there are enough jobs for everybody. And I do feel like there's enough to go around. So it's created more of a network and like, Ann, to hear your story about how that I'm so happy to hear that even when you were starting out, that women were gracious to you. And that's like incredible. Cause I think for so long we were kind of pitted against each other and nobody wanted to be pitted against each other. We were reluctant to do that. And I'm glad it's not that way anymore. Your hopes for the industry moving forward as it pertains to women. We've made a lot of strides and there is a representation, not as much as we'd like, obviously, but there is representation. But if we want to say like, what do you kind of hope for, whether it's sports talk radio, whether it's just the sports broadcasting industry in general, like what do you hope is next? Who wants to go first on this big one?
I guess I'll try that one. I'll try. But what I would hope is, and I'm still, Erica, I hear you, but I'm still reading all the comments. I really am. And I'm really just curious, and I know everybody's shaking.
Don't do it.
I know.
It's not healthy. It's not healthy.
Don't read the comments.
I can't help myself.
Even Moose says, don't read the comments. Don't read the comments.
No, but
it's just not worth it. My wife is tired of hearing about it. So just don't read the comments.
I keep going. I spent all my, do I look fat? You think I'm fat? What does that have to do with me? Wait, what? They don't even see me. I'm on the radio. Why does that matter? Don't read.
But what I'm trying to say is like, we had that nice post, the fan put out that nice post on International Women's Day. And I went through those comments, man. And I was like, we have made so much progress, right? I look at Ann, we have made so much progress. But then you read those comments, and I know that's like the doldrums of Twitter. I get it. But you still look at how much more we have to go. You know what I mean? And I feel like if you know what you're talking about, it shouldn't matter. I think, and a comment that I heard, for the WNBA and the NBA is game recognizes game. So if you know what you're talking about, if you're engaging, why should it matter? Like, who cares, like, what shirt you're wearing today? Like, you're on the radio. Like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So I just wish that people would just be more kind of, I don't want to say accepting, because most people are more open-minded, I would say, to see like a name like Danielle, like click on the link. You never know what you could find, you might like it, So that's where I wish it would go, especially as it relates to social media.
Don't let the idiots get you down, Danielle. Just seriously, you develop a very thick skin in this business, and to Erica's point, you just don't. After a while, you can't worry about it. You do the best job you can do. You go in as prepared as you can be, and that's all you can do. And there's always going to be chauvinists out there. There's always going to be people who don't like you. You can't please everybody. You just have to go out there, have a great time, do the best you can do, and then just go forward. Don't worry about, all the criticism, because you're always going to get criticized no matter what, and you can't please everybody. So that's a little advice for the younger generation.
I'll jump,
Erica,
to your question though about the future and what we would hope. I'll make the comment now that you guys can edit out. Because I don't know if our station will love this. So here's a criticism of sports talk radio. And I watch it, how it's covered, and they talk about our ratings and how we're measured in ratings books. And the demographic that seems to matter, that everybody talks about, are men 25 to 54. And I actually said this back to Andrew Marchand in the Post, and he went, "Well, it's not me. I'm not making that up." And I said, I know, I understand. But, so we're ignoring young men, old men. And oh, by the way, there's a whole lot of people out there called women that it would be really nice if we not only put some voices on the air, but if we actually thought about our audiences as not just being men 25 to 54 and measured and advertisers. Imagine, the business side of me says, imagine the business opportunity. If we looked at it and said that women could show up to the party and we'd care about them as listeners and advertisers and market against them. So, not in Women's History Month, Heritage Month, or whatever we're talking about right now, it would be nice if marketers and advertisers and radio stations targeting sports, if people actually didn't just take a look at a snapshot of a male demo.
And you know what else too, Lori, I don't mean to cut in, but also too, how about covering women's sports? Not just reading off a tennis score of, Serena Williams, cover WNBA. We have a team in New York called the New York Liberty, and they're going to be pretty good. And they have a superstar player in Sabrina Ionescu. So, I have an overnight shift. What about 10 minutes on the New York Liberty? Drum up some interest for them. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm going to put that back at you and say, though, you know what? You're saying, who's that royal you? That's all of us. If you have your own show, you and I do, Maggie does, and Moose is, I know, and this is a hard thing I can put there to all of us, is I use news judgment, my own editorial judgment. And I know that this can sound like a double standard, but I'm trying to think about getting the phones to ring and getting interest. And so you balance and say, are people wanting to, are the phones going to ring if I'm going to talk about WNBA? And then you carve out that time for, okay, this could be, I'm going to talk about this, but you know what? The phones are going to ring if I'm talking about the Mets and the Yankees.
Right.
Well, I also think, we'll know that women have really made an impact and, a lot of improvements in the business when they become decision makers and when they become the programmers. It's one thing to be on the air and to have all these opportunities as a female on air, whether you're in television, cable, or radio. But, the decision makers really set the agenda. And until we see more women in programming positions and making the decisions in sports broadcasting, then have we really progressed that much? That's my 2 cents worth. I basically put this sports interview, cable show together starting in 1989. And the only way it got on the air back then is because I went out and brought in all my own sponsors. And the show aired for 17 straight years. And I interviewed everybody from Billie Jean King to Ted Williams to, Wilt Chamberlain, everybody. But I did it all on my own because no network executive was offering me, this opportunity to host a show that I really wanted to do for cable. But in doing that, I learned that, women can do that. We can go out and get the sponsors and bring them in. We can go out and put our own shows together. It's not done a lot because it's very difficult, But I think you really sometimes have to just create your own opportunities. And until we see more and more women doing that kind of programming and kind of putting their own productions together, I don't think we're going to, I think there's a lot more progress we can make in that area.
Yeah. So Danielle, how about this? You and me, a commitment right now. We're both going to step it up a little bit. Well, we have to find a way to cover a little bit more women's sports.
Yeah, I mean, I hosted the GM and the head coach of the New York Liberty probably like a couple weeks ago. Just to drum up some interest for the season. I created a women's NCAA bracket challenge. I got like 45 people in there, which is pretty cool. So and I challenge my listeners. It's an Olympic year, and you were talking about the Olympics. My New Year's resolution for my listeners was to turn on a women's sport. At any point during the year, you have a great opportunity with the Olympics. There are some great athletes, and there was my challenge to them.
Well, just some history on that, Danielle, on the WNBA. I remember going into David Stern's, the commissioner of the NBA, the late David Stern now, going into his office and interviewing him for my sports interview show years ago, before the Olympics, the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. And that was in '96. And he said that they were thinking about putting the WNBA together. It wasn't announced yet, but they were thinking about it. And it was all going to be based on how the women's United States basketball team did at those Olympics in Atlanta. And he said he would be committed to this league no matter what. And that's what we need more of. We need people in power positions who have the money, the sponsorships, and the dedication to pour money into women's sports until it works, because they have to start somewhere. And I so admire, the late David Stern for many things. He was such a visionary, but he made sure that they did not, desert the WNBA until it gained legs and was a success story, because it had a lot of years in the beginning where they weren't making any money. And the NBA, poured a lot of money into it. So you need commitment like that to help, a lot of different women's sports organizations to grow and thrive.
Yeah.
By the way, how much cooler is Anna Liguori than any of us? Like, oh yeah, so
my God,
David Stern before, like what?
By a power of 10, Lori. By a power of 10.
The 96 Olympics.
Incredible.
Erica, how about you? Where do you think the next step is for women in broadcasting?
Well, I think my hope would be that all these beautiful women that are on TV right now, when they age, they still have jobs. I think some of the ugliest men on the planet that like are corpses are still on TV. My hope is that
that's true.
Amazingly talented and beautiful reporters and play-by-play announcers still have jobs when 30 years rolls by. And my fear is that is just not gonna. It's just gonna continue to be that ageism will exist, and that beyond sexism, ageism. Now that we're sort of aging, like Anne was saying, when she started in the '80s, there were no women in sports. When I started, the idea of a sideline reporter being this model on the sideline, that was a brand new concept. So now you see there's a dime a dozen, like on every broadcast, there's always one beautiful girl, right? So I remember Jill Arrington was a sideline reporter when I was first coming up in the 90s. And I remember, who's the guy from 60 Minutes?
Mike Wallace?
No, the guy at the end that would do the
Andy Rooney.
Andy Rooney. I will never forget, Andy Rooney did his little 60-second thing, right? And about sideline and women on the sideline, and it was like a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Never forget that. It was like probably 90.
It's awful.
And I remember that, and it was really geared toward Jill Arrington. And now that it became a trend, and so my hope is that the trend continues, but that we don't get replaced by pretty faces, which will exist, and talent will be there. But those women that have worked their butts off for the last decades, prior, that they still have opportunities in the business. Because when you start feeling a little older and you feel like you're aging out, it's a hard, it's not an easy feeling that your time's running out. on the air, or your time's running out in the business, and what are you going to do next? Because you still have a good 40 years left in your life and have a career. So my fear is it won't get better, and it won't be what I want it to be, but I'm hopeful. So I hope that, we don't age out.
That's a good point. You have to reinvent yourself when you get after a certain age. And you have to go back to creating your own opportunities, because it's a reality. People don't want to hire women over a certain age. And you're right. I travel around the country watching the local news programs, and you have these gorgeous women, and then they're next to these male anchors that are just hideous, right? And you're like, what is wrong with this picture? But it's a reality. It's crazy.
I know.
So that's a good point, Erica. Hopefully it will change, but I don't know.
I think wrap it up, sort of, I don't know, my 2 cents on this and kind of where I hope it goes is I feel like there's probably been, and I know there's been, a lot of really talented, driven women who left the industry because they didn't feel welcome. And my hope for the future is that more women who get into this industry don't feel like that they either feel so either marginalized, ostracized, feel so different, feel so unwelcome that they just end up leaving it all together. And that could be the broadcasting side, that could be the business side. I mean, that could be any area of sports where all of a sudden you're like, I can't take this anymore. I don't have to put up with this anymore, and I'm not going to. And we end up losing, I think, a lot of really talented and women who could have really great careers in sports because it's not so welcoming sometimes, especially at the beginning. But honestly, at all stops. That's kind of my hope for the future, that it becomes a more tolerable environment for women. But okay. I think we covered a lot of ground. Ladies, I cannot tell you how much, I was just in awe of all of you, and actually just being able to sit here and listen to you guys has been fantastic. I've loved this. So thank you. And, hopefully it doesn't take another Women's History Month for us to all get together again, but we can start making this maybe a more often occurrence, so we can get together and talk about the industry from our point of view.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this.
And, that, all you guys have to do is ask. And I think, we'll always show up for you.
Definitely.
Appreciate that. And Liguori is the first show I ever produced at WFAN, overnight.
Marc.
Overnight.
Hey, Liguori, what's the story? And I was going to tell you all about first show.
Poured out saying who let the dogs out at 5 o'clock in the morning when the Mets are on the run.
Who let the dogs out?
That kept us up all night long.
That was so much fun. I remember that. I really do.
Don't you remember that?
What year was that, Marc? Because, my show started July 4th, 1987. And that Hey, Liguori, What's the Story show aired for 23 plus years. But, I've been on the station since 1987. So what year did you start?
Yeah, I came back August of 2000. So it was, and then I was, so August of 2000, I came back to be the weekend overnight producer.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
Yeah,
I love the overnights because you could just talk and had so many people on. All oh my gosh, I had
figures on, and then everybody. Guys on from MSNBC at 2:30. Bert Sugar was live.
Everyone, Jim Brown, Kevin.
Nobody ever on tape. Here's Roddy Piper at 5 o'clock. I mean, it was crazy, the guest list that Ann.
They all came on, but they all listened. And they wanted to come on so bad because they knew they'd have time to talk, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was great.
I remember I started, I think my first year at the station was 2007. I think that was the first time that I got on, because I know that I was on for the Giants Super Bowl run, and one of the highlights being able to be on the air right after they won that Super Bowl. And I remember, so I'm new and I'm trying to get some guests for the overnight and find some sports writer or somebody who'll talk to me for the overnight. And I'm looking up and it's and Ann has Bob Costas this week. The level of guests of who Ann gets, and you're looking at yeah, I'm gonna get somebody, but Ann has, I don't know, a former president or somebody. You're like, what?
I just met all these people through the years, and they became friends of mine, and they never said no. Anytime I'd call and say, can you do it? they loved it. Plus FAN, such a powerful vehicle. So no matter what time you're on, you can get them on the air, really.
Absolutely.
No, you could get them on the air.
Yes, you, Ann.
I couldn't get anybody on the air, but
Not us, you.
Well, I'll come on the air with you anytime. How's that?
There you go.
There you go.
All right.
Anytime, any day.
Done.
Thank you so much. This was so
All right,
much fun.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And
Okay, guys.
we'll do it again. Let's do this again. This would be good. We should check in with each other every couple months or something and just because there's I have 15 more questions that we didn't even get to. So I have to empty the notebook.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
Thanks, Ann. We'll have that in our heads now for the next week.
All right. Hey, this was great. What a great idea this was. Anytime I'm there, you guys. This is awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Moose. Bye, Maggie.
Bye,
All right,
guys.
Bye.
Erica, let's connect soon. Bye.
Definitely. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.